At Whitmore Corporation, employees feared speaking up. The billionaire CEO ruled with arrogance, humiliating anyone who made a mistake. No one dared to challenge him until a new cook arrived. Calm, skilled, and fearless, she refused to stay silent. In a single moment, she turned the tables, standing up for dignity and justice. This is the story of one woman's courage that changed an entire company. Richard Whitmore, Jr. had built his empire on fear, and the employees of Whitmore Corporation had learned early on that resistance was not an option. For years he had ruled with an iron fist disguised in polished Italian suits and icy blue eyes that demanded obedience without question. Every office, every corridor, and every meeting bore the weight of his presence. Assistants flinched when he entered a room, managers rehearsed apologies for mistakes that had not yet occurred, and employees lowered their heads, hoping to remain invisible. Humiliation had become the currency of survival, and no one dared to challenge the billionaire who had inherited everything yet believed he deserved absolute control over every soul under his roof. In the midst of this oppressive atmosphere, Kesha Washington walked into the cafeteria for the first time, carrying not just a tray of ingredients, but a mind trained to observe, analyze, and quietly resist. She was new, only 2 weeks in, but she immediately recognized the patterns that had silenced the entire staff, the subtle glances, the hesitant nods, the barely concealed fear, and the unquestioned submission to Whitmore's whims. While others prepared food mechanically, barely acknowledging his presence, Kesha noticed the way he lingered on certain employees, assessing, judging, and humiliating with precision. She understood instantly that this was not just arrogance. It was a carefully cultivated system of control, one that preyed on insecurity, race, and hierarchy. On her first day, Kesha observed Whitmore storming into the cafeteria mid-morning, his suit immaculate, his demeanor sharp, his voice slicing through the chatter like a knife. He began inspecting the trays, questioning the temperature of the coffee, the alignment of the utensils, and the freshness of the produce, never addressing his criticisms to the team as a whole, but singling out individuals with words that carried humiliation disguised as feedback. His gaze fell on Kesha, and she felt the weight of it, not with fear, but with measured awareness. She had faced far worse than spoiled coffee or misplaced forks. She had grown up in Detroit, navigating streets where failure could mean danger, surviving through discipline and resourcefulness, and learning that patience, strategy, and resilience were tools more powerful than fear. Kesha took in every word, every movement, and every whisper from employees who dared not speak, committing it to memory, storing it for the day when courage demanded action. The employees themselves were a study in silence. 1,500 people, each skilled and educated, each capable of thought and critique, yet each rendered motionless by the shadow of Whitmore's dominance. They lowered their heads when he approached, whispered apologies before being asked, and carried out tasks not with pride, but with a desperate hope of invisibility. Janet, the cafeteria supervisor, had worked under Whitmore for decades, navigating his moods with cautious respect. She recognized Kesha's presence immediately, sensing a quiet strength beneath the apron and observing the way she scanned the cafeteria with intelligence and clarity rather than submission. Janet knew the risks of standing up to Whitmore. She had seen careers destroyed by a single misstep, yet she found herself quietly admiring the newcomer who did not flinch at the CEO's piercing scrutiny. The defining moment came one afternoon, when Whitmore, dissatisfied with the performance of the cafeteria staff, unleashed a tirade meant to shame and belittle. He singled out Kesha and the team, his words heavy with condescension, insinuating that their background and capabilities were inferior, that their presence in the company cafeteria was a mistake. The room, usually filled with the low hum of conversation and clatter of dishes, fell silent. Employees froze mid-bite, eyes wide, hands suspended, hearts pounding. Whitmore expected compliance, whispered apologies, and lowered heads. but he did not receive them. Kesha's response was immediate, sharp, and unwavering. She met his icy blue eyes with determination, her posture straight, her voice resonant and calm, yet impossible to ignore. "You have no right to speak to me that way," she said, each word deliberate, carrying both courage and moral authority. The cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment every employee had dreamed of but never dared to enact. Kesha's words were not just a personal rebuke, they were a declaration that dignity mattered more than fear. Whitmore froze, the room holding his reaction hostage. The arrogance that had gone unchallenged for years met a force it could not predict. He attempted to speak, his voice trembling with indignation, but Kesha did not flinch. Her internal monologue was a storm of clarity and resolve. She had observed, endured, and analyzed, and now the time for passive observation had ended. "I dare because someone has to," she continued. "You may own this company, but you don't own people's dignity." Employees looked on in stunned silence, their eyes wide, realizing that the impossible had occurred. Kesha Washington, the new cook, in the cafeteria, had done what no one else dared. She had confronted the tyrant directly, standing as an equal in a room built on hierarchy and fear. For Whitmore, the encounter was jarring, a new experience of vulnerability, shock, and uncertainty. For the employees, it was a revelation, a single spark of courage illuminating the possibility that fear did not have to dictate behavior, that one voice could challenge a system built on intimidation, and that dignity could, at last, be defended. After Kesha's bold confrontation, Richard Whitmore Jr. could not tolerate the loss of control. For a man used to unquestioned authority, being challenged by a cafeteria cook was intolerable. The retaliation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Kesha arrived on Monday to find her shifts reorganized, her hours now stretching from 5 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, covering both breakfast for the early executives and lunch for the entire staff of 1,500. The schedule was grueling, physically exhausting, and designed to humiliate. But Kesha did not falter. She had endured hardship her entire life, and she knew when to conserve energy and when to strike with precision. Whitmore circled the cafeteria. During peak hours, scrutinizing every movement, every tray, every interaction, his comments sharp and deliberate, always aimed to undermine her confidence in front of colleagues and visitors. Subtle racial innuendos accompanied the criticisms, never blatant enough to warrant complaints, yet unmistakable to those paying attention. Employees lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze, but Kesha observed everything with clarity, recording mentally the injustices she would later expose. Kesha's mind was never idle. Her upbringing in Detroit's toughest neighborhoods had taught her resilience, resourcefulness, and strategy. She remembered nights watching her grandmother clean offices and sell flowers, learning to cook meals for her family on minimal ingredients, and understanding early that survival required intelligence, patience, and planning. Her education as a chef had been hard-won, facing teachers who doubted her abilities, questioning whether someone from her background could handle the precision of high-level culinary work. Beyond cooking, Kesha had worked as an assistant to a renowned investigative chef, learning to document irregularities, conduct meticulous research, and build irrefutable cases. This knowledge became her secret weapon. While Whitmore attempted to break her spirit, she was quietly constructing a plan that would turn every act of intimidation into evidence against him. Health violations in the cafeteria became Kesha's first focus. She documented equipment operating at unsafe temperatures, expired ingredients being reused, and chemical hazards ignored by staff who were forced to handle toxic substances without proper protective gear. Every photograph, every note, every observation was a layer in the case she was building. She maintained impeccable professionalism, ensuring her work could never be faulted, and quietly collected details that would later prove crucial. Her colleagues, unaware of her intentions, continued to fear Whitmore, but they were drawn to Kesha's calm authority, the way she navigated pressure without compromise. Patricia Coleman, the company's internal auditor, soon became an unexpected ally. A highly intelligent woman with a Harvard accounting degree, Patricia had noticed financial discrepancies while reviewing supplier contracts. When she discreetly approached Kesha, she provided evidence of Whitmore's corporate fraud. Inflated supply costs, fabricated expenses, and misappropriated funds that had been hidden for years. Patricia trusted Kesha's judgment and instinctively recognized her determination to act ethically. The folder she handed over contained spreadsheets, invoices, and contracts that painted a damning picture of systematic theft and abuse. Kesha examined the documents with a practiced eye, already envisioning how to weave them together with the health violations, the discriminatory comments, and the behavioral patterns of the CEO. Meanwhile, Whitmore continued his campaign of public humiliation, unaware that every action he took only strengthened Kesha's position. He brought visiting executives and investors through the cafeteria, presenting it as a model of efficiency, while subtly mocking Kesha and her team. He commented on their intelligence, suggested that employees of certain backgrounds could not meet corporate standards, and expected smiles, apologies, or lowered heads. Kesha met his gaze with unwavering composure, never flinching, her demeanor calm yet charged with quiet authority. Every insult, every display of arrogance became material for the case she meticulously assembled. Her notes were precise, her photographs methodical, and her recordings unobtrusive. By the time Whitmore realized the extent of her preparation, it would be too late. Kesha's strategy was deliberate and multi-layered. She documented physical violations in the cafeteria, labor exploitation, discriminatory language, and financial fraud. Each element was independently significant, but together they formed an irrefutable case. She maintained a rhythm of normal work, never alerting Whitmore to her investigation. Her approach was patient, recognizing that a rushed or obvious effort could be sabotaged. Patricia's contribution was crucial, providing the legal and financial proof to complement Kesha's operational evidence. The combination of meticulous research, first-hand documentation, and strategic alliances meant that Kesha was preparing not just a legal takedown, but a public revelation of the CEO's systemic abuse. While Whitmore's arrogance escalated, Kesha remained composed, confident, and focused. She understood timing, influence, and leverage, preparing to strike when the maximum impact could be achieved. She knew that evidence alone would not be enough. She needed the perfect moment when the humiliation and fraud would be undeniable, indisputable, and public. The tension built day by day as Whitmore continued his petty persecutions, oblivious to the storm forming around him. Kesha's mind was precise and strategic, transforming every challenge, insult, and act of intimidation into ammunition. In the quiet early hours of the morning, long before the cafeteria opened, she organized her notes, refined her evidence, and rehearsed her plan mentally. Every photograph, every recording, every spreadsheet was cataloged with care. By the end of the second week, the atmosphere was electric with unspoken tension. Whitmore continued his campaign of humiliation, but Kesha had shifted from being a target to being a strategist. Every insult, every microaggression, and every observation had purpose. The employees who had once cowered in silence now saw the possibility of change through her example, though they did not yet know the full scope of her plan. Kesha Washington was no longer merely a cook. She had become the quiet architect of a reckoning, gathering evidence, building alliances, and preparing to expose the man who had ruled through fear for so long. Every detail mattered, and she refused to waste a single opportunity to turn the CEO's arrogance against him. Richard Whitmore, Jr. arrived at the cafeteria that morning with a polished smile and a camera crew in tow, convinced that he was orchestrating a flawless display of leadership. He intended to showcase the corporation's commitment to diversity and inclusivity, highlighting the cafeteria staff as a symbol of the company's progressive values. Whitmore approached Kesha Washington with an overconfident charm, certain that her cooperation would reinforce his carefully crafted narrative. She greeted him politely, her voice warm, her demeanor calm, but beneath that composed exterior, her mind was sharply calculating. Every angle, every interaction, every word spoken on camera was being catalogued, silently recorded, and prepared to be used at the precise moment when his carefully constructed facade would collapse. Whitmore believed he controlled the story, but Kesha was already several moves ahead, the architect of a reckoning he could not anticipate. As the filming continued, Whitmore flaunted his self-perceived inclusivity, introducing visiting executives and narrating their interactions with employees, emphasizing how diverse backgrounds brought unique insights to the company. Kesha maintained professionalism, serving food, answering questions, and guiding the camera crew with measured poise. To the outside observer, it appeared as though she were compliant, supportive even, but in reality, she was quietly collecting the final pieces of evidence that would ensure Whitmore's downfall. Hidden devices captured his words, his subtle microaggressions, and the patronizing tone he used when speaking to staff. Photographs documented unsafe kitchen practices, expired ingredients, and improper handling of chemicals, while her previous documentation of fraudulent financial reports provided an irrefutable legal and ethical record. Every moment was calculated. Every smile and nod was tactical. Whitmore remained oblivious, misreading her composure as submission, while Kesha's careful patience ensured the storm would arrive at the perfect time. The culmination of Kesha's strategy would be the live Ethical CEO of the Year award ceremony, a nationally broadcast event attended by executives, journalists, and influential leaders. The award was intended to solidify Whitmore's reputation as an ethical leader, but Kesha had orchestrated a reversal so precise that the event would instead become the stage for his ultimate public exposure. 3 hours before the ceremony, Patricia Coleman personally delivered a comprehensive folder of evidence to James Morrison, the president of the National Business Association. Within the folder were photographs of health violations in the cafeteria, fraudulent financial documents revealing millions in misappropriated funds, and a 25-minute audio recording of Whitmore's discriminatory comments, laced with condescension and blatant racial bias. Morrison, a man of integrity with a long-standing reputation for corporate transparency, reviewed the evidence with growing concern. The combination of documentation, visual proof, and audio recordings left no room for doubt. Whitmore's actions violated ethics, law, and basic human decency. By the time the ceremony began, Whitmore was unaware that his nomination had become a liability rather than an honor. Standing on stage, impeccably dressed, he delivered his rehearsed speech about family values, diversity, and social responsibility, the cameras capturing every practiced smile. The audience, consisting of 500 executives, journalists, and public figures, listened politely, unaware that the narrative was about to be shattered. Morrison approached the stage discreetly, holding a tablet and wireless microphone, and interrupted the proceedings with calm authority. His voice echoed throughout the ballroom, commanding attention and silence. "Before we proceed with the awards," he announced, "we have received information that is essential to share with all of you." Whitmore froze mid-sentence, the first inkling of panic flickering across his features. Cameras instinctively pivoted toward Morrison as he connected the tablet to the hall's audio-visual system. The recordings played through the speakers, amplifying every word of Whitmore's derogatory commentary. His voice filled the ballroom, echoing in perfect clarity. "People like this should not be preparing food in a serious company. Certain backgrounds, limited intellectual capacity." The audience was stunned into silence as they absorbed the gravity of the statements, the calculated prejudice, and the casual cruelty that had gone unchecked for years. Simultaneously, photographs of health code violations, unsafe equipment, and improperly handled ingredients flashed on the giant screen behind the stage, alongside documents proving fraudulent financial activity amounting to millions. Whitmore's face drained of color as he attempted to regain composure to interject explanations, but Morrison's measured authority allowed no interruption. These documents and recordings provide irrefutable evidence of unethical practices, discrimination, and criminal mismanagement, Morrison declared. The consequences were immediate and overwhelming. The audience erupted in murmurs, camera flashes, and hurried note-taking. Reporters began recording live, executives exchanged incredulous glances, and social media began to buzz with breaking updates. Whitmore's carefully constructed public image crumbled in real time. Security escorted him from the stage as he shouted incoherent protests, demanding to know who had orchestrated the exposure. Morrison's calm response resonated through the hall. A courageous employee who refused to remain silent and who gathered the truth with diligence and integrity. Within hours, national networks were covering the story. While Whitmore Corp's stock plummeted, partner companies reconsidered contracts, and the federal prosecutor's office opened investigations into corporate fraud, labor violations, and systemic discrimination. Employees, long silent and fearful, began to see the power of courage and accountability, recognizing that one determined individual could overturn a culture of fear and impunity. Kesha Washington had transformed the cafeteria confrontation into a watershed moment of justice, proving that integrity, meticulous planning, and bravery could hold even the most powerful accountable. The morning after the public exposure, the Whitmore Corporation Board of Directors convened an emergency session, their faces reflecting a mixture of disbelief, guilt, and urgency. 12 senior executives, long complicit in the culture of fear, waited anxiously as Kesha Washington entered the room for the first time as an invited guest, not a subordinate. Every step she took across the polished floor echoed authority, confidence, and purpose. Margaret Thompson, chair of the board and the only woman among them, spoke first, her voice steady, yet tinged with genuine remorse. She formally apologized for the toxic environment allowed to flourish under their watch, acknowledging the humiliation, fear, and systemic injustice employees had endured. The board extended a remarkable offer: the position of Director of Culinary Operations for the entire corporation, a senior leadership role commanding both respect and influence. Kesha accepted the gravity of the moment, understanding that her next steps could reshape not only the company but the lives of every employee who had suffered under Whitmore's reign. Kesha's acceptance came with deliberate conditions. First, she mandated the immediate creation of anti-discrimination programs for all executives, designed not as performative gestures but as mandatory, ongoing training. Second, she insisted on establishing permanent employee committees with the authority to report irregularities without fear of retaliation, ensuring transparency and accountability at every level. Third, she advocated for preferential hiring of professionals from marginalized communities for leadership positions, recognizing that real transformation required representation, opportunity, and the dismantling of entrenched hierarchies. The board listened, engaged, and approved, understanding that these measures were not mere recommendations but essential directives from someone who had demonstrated courage, competence, and vision. Kesha's terms signaled a new era, one in which integrity and merit would replace intimidation and nepotism. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore, Jr. faced a perfect storm of consequences. Federal prosecutors filed multiple criminal charges, including corporate fraud, tax evasion, labor violations, and systematic discrimination. Financially, his empire crumbled as shareholders demanded accountability and partner companies severed lucrative contracts. Socially, he was a pariah. Media coverage, viral videos of his public humiliation, and compilations of his degrading behavior ensured his reputation would never recover. From a life of opulence and control, Whitmore was reduced to navigating the world with diminished means, living in a modest apartment, driving a used vehicle and confronting a society that now recognized him as a symbol of arrogance undone by courage. Kesha's leadership marked a dramatic transformation within the company. The cafeteria, once a site of fear and subjugation, became a model of operational excellence, innovation, and dignity. Employees were promoted based on merit rather than social connections, ability rather than submission. Kesha implemented rigorous training programs, scholarships for culinary education, and mentorship initiatives, ensuring that talent could flourish regardless of background. Patricia Coleman, whose insight had been pivotal in exposing Whitmore, was elevated to Chief Financial Officer, the first Black woman to hold such a position in the company's history. Janet, the longtime supervisor who had quietly supported Kesha, assumed the role of General Manager of Operations. Numerous employees previously paralyzed by fear now assumed leadership roles, empowered to uphold the principles of fairness, accountability, and respect. The transformation attracted media attention on a national scale. Business Weekly published a cover story on the Whitmore Revolution, highlighting how a corporation on the brink of ethical collapse had been revitalized through integrity, accountability, and courage. Kesha Washington emerged as a symbol of corporate valor, demonstrating that one individual, armed with evidence, conviction, and a commitment to justice, could inspire systemic change. Her speeches at conferences, corporate summits, and educational institutions reached millions, with viral moments emphasizing that dignity and professionalism are not commodities to be traded, but rights to be protected. Measurable outcomes reinforced her leadership. Productivity increased by 40%, employee retention improved, and morale soared. The results proved that respect and competence were not just ethical imperatives, but strategic advantages. A year later, Kesha returned to the cafeteria where her journey had begun. The room, now transformed, hummed with energy, innovation, and pride. Employees worked with confidence, collaboration, and enthusiasm, the oppressive atmosphere that once defined the space entirely gone. Kesha stood by the window, looking out, over the city she had helped shape, reflecting on the journey from silent observer to powerful catalyst of change. She thought of her grandmother, of the lessons about dignity, courage, and resilience that had guided her through adversity. One voice, unwavering and principled, had challenged arrogance, disrupted systemic oppression, and created a legacy of empowerment. Kesha's story demonstrated that courage is contagious, integrity is transformative, and justice, when pursued strategically and relentlessly, can reshape even the most entrenched systems. She had proven that one person's refusal to remain silent could topple tyranny, elevate the marginalized, and redefine corporate culture. Her leadership and vision not only dismantled the power of a tyrant, but also built structures ensuring that no individual could wield unchecked authority again. Through Kesha Washington, the world saw that dignity, integrity, and courage are not abstract ideals. They are forces capable of producing real, lasting change. Employees no longer worked in fear. They worked with purpose, pride, and the knowledge that fairness and competence were finally valued above privilege and intimidation.